King of the Hill Season 14 continued its strong start with Episode 3, Bobby Gets Grilled, an episode that really showcases Bobby's professional life and forces him to prove himself to business partners, cultural critics, and loved ones. This episode also does some pretty fun tightrope walking with its social commentary in regards to cultural appropriation, and in the most King of the Hill way, the episode heavily centers around propane coming between Hank and his son. And honestly, when it comes down to it, I would say this is one of the most important episodes in the history of Hank and Bobby's relationship. So put away your propane accessories, grab a bag of charcoal, and let's dive in. And hey, if you like this breakdown, please consider subscribing. Not only will I be releasing one for every single episode of the season over the next couple of weeks, but over on my Patreon, I'll be posting my uncut reaction videos to my first time watching each episode. If that piques your interest, basically when I post the new episode breakdown on this channel, I'll simultaneously post my reaction video to that episode on my Patreon. Check it out if you're interested, and thanks for the support. Okay, so this episode completely hinges on something that a lot of us predicted after learning about Bobby's Robata restaurant, that he isn't using propane. Robata is a Japanese cooking method that traditionally uses charcoal, so it wasn't a particularly big stretch to presume there would be a propane versus charcoal conflict here, and Hank is obviously about as upset as you'd think he'd be. I thought this dialogue here also did a pretty great job giving us some implied backstory from the interim period, with Hank talking about their long conversations on the phone, going over the various propane grill options for the restaurant. Honestly, while even just the King of the Hill layman would know that Bobby using charcoal could be a relationship-ending decision in Hank's eyes, I feel like the implied backstory here makes it even harsher. The pride Hank must have felt advising Bobby on what propane grill to use for his own restaurant, and even doing this from across the world over the phone, this was clearly super important to Hank.
Those were some of the best times we ever spent together.
You can tell that Bobby is pretty ashamed of the dishonesty too, but I also don't know if you can really blame him for being afraid to tell Hank the truth. There's a great episode in the original run where Peggy and Bobby start using charcoal behind Hank's back, and that obviously didn't go over well. Using charcoal instead of propane is like a betrayal to Hank. And this initial conflict sends Hank and Bobby their separate ways for the day, Hank going to the George W. Bush Presidential Library, and Bobby desperately trying to find a new supplier for his special Binchitan charcoal. But this basically turns this episode into a story that ruminates on authenticity, and I think it does that in a shockingly fun and well-balanced way. I wondered if this would be addressed at all, since Bobby is basically just a young white dude from Texas running an authentic Japanese and German fusion restaurant, and obviously a lot of people these days might question whether he should be allowed to do that or not, or whether you can even call that authentic. And I love that this episode approaches the concept of authenticity from so many different angles. When Bobby attempts to buy more Binchitan charcoal, the supplier, Mr. Yoshida, refuses to sell to him because he isn't Japanese. And then when they go to his business to try and convince him, they actually learn that this guy is black and was adopted and raised in Japan. It's immediately challenging the perception of what authenticity looks like. And to further illustrate this point, Bobby brings Chain along to try and convince Yoshida, and as a full-blown Laotian, Chain actually doesn't seem to know anything about Laotian culture.
If there was a Laotian martial art, I use it to kick your ass.
There is a Laotian martial art. It's called Mui Lao.
I think this is a pretty interesting piece of commentary. Again, challenging the perception of authenticity. Chain is 100% Laotian, but he's more familiar with frat culture than Laotian culture. The episode also isn't above exploring authenticity in funnier ways as well, particularly through the Italian restaurant in Bobby's shopping plaza run by Mr. Capitelli. This definitely seems more comedically minded than anything, but it's a pretty great bit. Basically, these Italians are full-on stereotypical caricatures and even attempt to shake down Bobby and exchange leases for a charcoal hookup. But when Bobby calls them out, they're super offended.
Do I look like Tony Soprano to you?
That show is why I canceled my HBO.
I particularly loved this conversation that Bobby had with Joseph and Emilio, which covered these things from a lot of different angles. For one, the very idea of a character like Joseph, who is basically a Native American who thinks he's white.
As a white dude, apparently, I can't be Speedy Gonzalez anymore.
Side note, this is explicit confirmation that Bobby knows the truth about Joseph's parentage, which is pretty interesting, and now that Joseph is an adult, I'm really curious if the show is going to ever fully address this through the character. Obviously, the idea here is that he's so much like Dale that he also can't see the obvious truth in front of him, but it's definitely interesting to pointedly use this character in this scenario, somebody who, particularly as we saw in the last episode, fully takes after his very white father, despite his actual ancestral heritage. And bringing up Speedy Gonzales brings up another very interesting observation.
Speedy Gonzales racist? He's a hero.
This is something that has been talked about a lot. The fact that so many Latinos love Speedy Gonzales, despite the fact that he's a stereotype voiced by a white dude. He is a beloved piece of pop culture iconography, and it's definitely not a coincidence that this was broached in the episode that's all about whether or not a white dude should be allowed to cook Japanese food. It's also interesting that they have this Mel Blanc conversation, both heralding him as a genius and pointing out that he was voicing a lot of stereotypical characters. Maybe a not so subtle nod to King of the Hill's own genius voice actor Toby Huss, though I think a lot of King of the Hill fans were missing Toby's con this season. I also just loved this entire conversation from a character perspective, giving us great insight into adult Joseph, developing Emilio as a supporting character more, and also showcasing a great appreciation and understanding for Bobby. Yeah, he's a professional chef now, but he still absolutely geeks out on comedy history any chance he gets. Let's just say I saw a lot of myself in Bobby in this scene. And obviously the last place Bobby gets interrogated about his restaurant is on the German side of things. Man, Bobby Gets Grilled really was the perfect title for this episode. At this point, it really just feels like it's meant to bombard Bobby from every side imaginable. I've also seen a lot of people praise this little callback about Cotton.
He machine gunned my grandfather.
So he was one of the 50 man?
Definitely a very funny delivery, so it gets a pass, but it also felt a little sweaty in setup to me. Like, would this guy really know the identity of the person who killed his grandfather in WW2? They get away with a couple callbacks in the same vein this year. Sweaty setups saved by very funny punchlines. It's also very funny to think about what Cotton might have thought of Bobby running a Japanese-German fusion restaurant, given he claimed he fought in both Europe and the Pacific during the war. Okay, shifting from the ways this episode explores cultural authenticity, let's talk about Hank's journey through the George W. Bush Presidential Library, which I guess more or less confirms who Hank ended up voting for in the episode The Perils of Polling. Hank nearly didn't vote at all because W gave him a limp handshake, but at the very end of the episode he casts a ballot, though the episode never confirmed who he voted for. The way Hank wistfully pines for the days of George W. definitely implies which direction that ballot was cast, though.
So many jobs created with one pen stroke.
I think the subplot was pretty fun and effective within this story, forcing Hank to reckon with the ways some people have shifted to more radical beliefs. And I think a museum was a pretty great setting for that subplot. With history literally at their fingertips, people are often choosing to ignore the truth that's in front of them. And obviously this is explored via Dale. Gotta quickly shout out Hank's frustrations with Dale, leading to one of the funniest things I've ever heard him say.
Nancy is a good Hank.
But though the show is definitely exploring the ways some people have become more Dale-like in their conspiracy-minded attitudes, I also think the episode did a great job showcasing that Dale is still a few steps further into the fringe than most of them.
George Bush's secret twin brother job.
It felt like Hank was more or less trying to use the history represented in the museum to center himself in culture that he appreciates and understands, and he'd expect that a museum would be a very controlled environment to present this information. He just didn't anticipate the way the other people might behave in this quote-unquote controlled environment. And the ways Dale sort of took control of the tour and turned it into his own conspiracy lesson was very funny, very Dale. But I really appreciated the whole situation room sequence, where everyone has to take on historical roles and the ahistorical takes start to invade Hank's fantasy here. It was such a perfect distillation of Hank as a character. This revival did a great job not shifting him too far in any direction, and the ways he sensibly rejects the conspiracy-minded takes while also firmly maintaining his own principles was so well handled. Like when this woman wants to be Obama's Kenyan handler.
Obama was born in Hawaii. That's reason enough not to vote for him without making stuff up.
It was just a really fun way to confront Hank with the changing culture from a slightly different angle. Pretty expertly crafted through characters we already know and love. It gave them an opportunity to show that Hank is still Hank Hill, and his convictions are still in place, even though the world around him is shifted. Though history does still repeat itself. But I think the struggles Hank faces here in regards to historical accuracy are a pretty effective tie-in to his anger towards Bobby at the end of the episode, but we'll get there. Okay, now seems like a good time to talk about the absolute MVP of new characters, Emilio, played by comedian Anthony Citric Campos. Campos has actually been on King of the Hill before. He played Enrique's brother-in-law in season 9's Enrique Salable Differences, all the way back in 2005.
Hey, Are you Enrique's friend, Hank Hill?
But Judge recruited him to play a new, pretty major supporting role for the revival, one of the most substantial new characters joining the cast for sure, appearing in 6 episodes for season 14. And man, I absolutely love this guy. For one, he is absolutely one of the funniest and most likable dudes in the show. His response to Bobby calling Mel Blanc a genius killed me here.
Sounds more like a white guy who stole a lot of jobs from Latinos and farm animals.
But more importantly, Emilio is this foundational presence in Bobby's professional life. While Bobby is obviously skilled, passionate, and inspired to cook his cuisine, he's also very young. And with youth often comes a lot of people telling you how you should be doing things. Bobby is getting that from his business partners, his potential charcoal supplier, a bunch of random Germans, and of course, his own father. Every single person has an opinion about what the right way for him to do things is. And Bobby is forced to prove himself to all of them at the same time. This line kinda sums it up.
How do you pass a test when there's so many different people marking it?
And it's so easy to understand why that would be so overwhelming for Bobby. Despite knowing that his cooking is going to be better if he uses this specific type of charcoal, Hank, the Wasana-songs, and Mr. Yoshida are all basically telling him that he cannot or should not use it. In the Wasana-songs case, for cost effectiveness and simplicity, and for Hank and Mr. Yoshida, completely separate but strong moral convictions. The easiest thing for Bobby to do here would be to just use propane, to give in, to make everybody happy, and he considers it. But despite being Bobby's sous chef, Emilio basically acts as a mentor figure to Bobby. He's been around the block, he's a restaurant veteran, and he knows that the most important thing Bobby has that will keep his business afloat is integrity.
And all of them went under because they didn't do their homework and were trying too hard to please everyone else. You're a great chef, Bobby.
Man, not only do I just love this sentiment, but this delivery. While I mentioned in my last video that I'd love to see Bobby's friend group expand a bit, Emilio is the vital support pillar in his professional life. Somebody with a bit more experience and perspective to help guide Bobby's raw talent and passion, and see through all the bureaucracy he's got to deal with. Honestly, after I finish all these episode breakdowns, or maybe after next season, I might make an Emilio video. He's a top tier addition to the cast. But Emilio reaffirming Bobby's belief in his own integrity was such a highlight and such a brilliant lead into the resolution here. Because ultimately, I think the message is that the thing that supersedes all of these questions of authenticity is the reality of Bobby's integrity. There are all kinds of inauthentic business endeavors that are simply trend chasing, trying to strike when the iron's hot and capitalize on other people's ideas, innovations, cultures, food, etc. Mr. Yoshida and the Germans maybe had a point when they were worried about the authenticity of Bobby's Robata restaurant. It's not a bad thing to be worried about inauthentic representations of their culture. But while Bobby might not be German or Japanese, he has an authentic love, appreciation, and understanding of those cuisines, and he was attempting to bring those cuisines to life in authentic ways. There is a genuine integrity behind his inspirations and motivations, and the fact that this shines through in his cooking is exactly what convinces them that he is somebody who treats their cultures with respect and admiration. And I think this is why this was such a perfect way to actually bring Hank around on Bobby's decision here. Hank has always been a character who first and foremost respects integrity. Hank's nightmarish experience at the George W. Bush Presidential Library highlighted that historical accuracy and integrity go hand in hand.
Recent events have made me understand why you value historical accuracy and authenticity.
And despite having firm personal beliefs about propane, Bobby's firm personal beliefs about providing an authentic Robata experience highlight his integrity. And man, I really loved this affirming line from Hank.
Everyone loves the food. And that includes me.
Getting Hank to say he loves food that was cooked with charcoal has got to be the absolute highlight of Bobby's relationship with his father up till this point. To me, this goes hand in hand with the original pilot's "Damn it, you're my boy" line and the original finale's handshake as quintessential Hank and Bobby moments. Even if Hank did have to headcanon some Robata lore a little bit to make it work for him.
Propane wasn't available in the 17th century, right? So maybe the inventors of Robata would have made that choice if only it had been available back then.
A pretty incredible cope from Hank, and a sweet moment that Bobby lets him have. Damn, these episodes are seriously just hitting it out of the park with these sweet and sentimental endings. I said it in the other breakdowns, but it's so relieving that the show's biggest moments and messages aren't at all rooted in cynicism and instead embrace the connection and relationships between these characters.
I'd like to make a toast to the chef. to Bobby Hill.
To me, this was a super vital moment in Hank and Bobby's relationship, especially as adults. Obviously, we're gonna still see generational friction between them. That's the whole crux of the show. But I cannot believe they were able to spin a compelling narrative that actually made me believe that Hank would come around to the idea of Bobby using charcoal in his restaurant. But further, it shows that despite his stubbornness, Hank has grown to trust Bobby's integrity. King of the Hill is often centered on Hank's stubbornness, blinding him to the underlying integrity in things he fails to understand. And this is just a pitch-perfect example of that formula. Between this emotional story between our main characters, the great showcase of Hank reconciling with new aspects of modern culture, the very funny, multifaceted approach to the idea of authenticity, and the proper coming out episode for probably the best new character in the show, Bobby Gets Grilled might be my favorite episode of the entire revival. And it might not surprise you to learn that it was co-written by a King of the Hill veteran, Norm Hiscock, responsible for a whole slew of classic episodes. Propane Boom, and They Call It Bobby Love, To Kill a Ladybird, Bobby Goes Nuts, The Bluegrass is Always Greener. Truly some of the best the show has to offer. Overall, I think the 1-2-3 punch of these first 3 episodes goes such a long way to re-establish the series and showcase that the current crew really has a great handle on the most important aspects of King of the Hill. While there are maybe a few growing pains in establishing the new time period and shifting the focus between Arlen and Dallas, the most important aspects of the series shine through, confidently building a new status quo out of their tried and true formulas. And that is all I've got for Season 14, Episode 3, Bobby Gets Grilled. Remember, if you like this breakdown, I've got the first 2 of the season up already, more for Season 14 on the way, uncut reactions to these episodes over on my Patreon, and of course, tons more King of the Hill videos across the channel. Check out all that if you're interested, and stay tuned for more. Peace.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.